Tonight I'm going to spend just a few minutes, and I am an ex-pastor, but I promise not to do the pastoral lie, an actual few minutes talking to you about the courage to be loved. Not the courage to love first, but the courage to be loved. So, when asked what the greatest commandment was, Jesus said what? To love God and to love your neighbor as yourself. Let me get a couple hands on this, And when asked what is the greatest health issue right now in our time, the 19th Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, said, loneliness. Wrote a whole book about it. In this moment, we are celebrating your success. And I want to give you a simple road to success, to what might be the most pressing call of our age, the courage to be loved. So, I'm going to do so with anchovies, cowboys, freedom, the Garden of Eden, and of course, Mr. Rogers. So we'll start with anchovies and cowboys. When I was in elementary school, I had my dad and I would do like daddy dates, and we'd watch movies together. And we would always do the same thing. We would go to Blockbuster. Anybody? I know it. Or Hollywood Video. It was always like Coke and Pepsi. It was like, you got the Hollywood Video in the back. Look at that. So we'd go to Blockbuster. We would get a VHS. We'd get a bottle of Coke, never Pepsi. Then we would go and get cans of thick, oceanic, pungent, salted, filleted anchovies. And I know. And we would eat them straight from the can as they dripped that green, gray, olive juice that drops back into the can and onto the table. And the liturgy of our house was we would come home and we would convince my mom, we swear we're not going to spill all of the juice on the carpet in the living room, which would have obviously rendered her living room completely inoperable until we professionally cleaned the carpet. And so this is what we would do. And then we would watch some type of, it's a spaghetti western. So it's like old-time 1970s western movies that were actually filmed in Italy. They call them spaghetti westerns, which is like very subtly racist, but whatever. So that's what we did. And so this is how it works. That if you've ever read a cowboy novel or you've watched a cowboy movie, you already know that there's also a liturgy to that, which goes like this. Lone grizzled figure on a single horse rides into town. Step one. There are bad guys or Indians, not so subtly racist, but they were always paired. It's just a thing. And he had a rough exterior, but he had a softer interior, so that when he flirted with girls, it wasn't creepy and weird.
Not the thing.
I was trying to give that punchline without smiling, but I can do it. And then there's a climactic shootout or a duel. And what does he do at the end? Thank you. He gets back on his horse. He rides off into the sunset. Just him and his horse. And me and anchovies and a Coca-Cola. And I loved these movies as a little kid, because it was really clear who the bad guys were, who the good guys were, and what freedom looked like. Freedom looks like someone riding alone into the sunset, brave hero on his horse. And we've all heard the American confessions. We have at least a few. Here's a couple of them. One, it's a free country. I can do what I want. American confession number one. Number two, I don't need nobody to be happy. When I was a pastor, we had this one lady who would literally run around the church sometimes just screaming, I don't need no man. So these are the two things these are the two things. It's a free country, it's raining really hard, and I don't need nobody to be happy. In other words, we all kind of believed our hero cowboy. Freedom is for me and my horse and my God-given right to do what I want. And if you squint just right at that picture of freedom, it kind of looks like the garden with Adam, with all of his animals, more than just a horse, but all by himself in the garden of paradise. That's the freedom we're all trying to go for, except there's a problem with that. Right about then, when paradise seemed so perfect in the Genesis account, we see God's first disapproval. Before there's even any sin, it's not good for man to be alone. Oh, John Wayne. What's always shocking to me about this is that this is before there's any sin. There's no sin in the world, and yet God is like, "Well, no, this is not going to work." Specifically, Adam, and so what was wrong here? Adam had no one to share himself with, no one to belong to, no one to open up the inner recesses of his heart and to be seen and accepted for just as he is. And while all of this is possible and necessary with God, which I punted to for years, well, I can do that with God. God himself said that that's not good enough. We need people. In other words, Adam had no one on earth to love him. And I want you to hear this, for you can only be loved to the depth that you are known. If you show the most surfacey part of yourself, you can only be loved to that surfacey level. And to be truly known is often a profound risk that requires not a small amount of courage. I watch men and women ready to fight a lion with their bare hands before telling their spouse or their best friend how they really feel and what they really need. The reality is that for God, a person living alone in the paradise of a curated garden was not good enough. I mean, Adam had like 10x Snow White St. Francis vibes with all of the animals around, and still that wasn't enough. Why? Because in such a pleasant state, he was still unseen and therefore unloved. So let's talk about your future. You stand at the threshold of a new level of freedom and responsibility. At the turn of a tassel, you will be taking your first step through that door. You're entering into you're leaving the twilight of your childhood, and you're entering into the dawn of your adult life. And the temptation is to ride off into that sunset alone. Right now, 1 out of 10 adults are experiencing loneliness daily. It's been discovered that social isolation increases mortality rates to such a degree that it is the same as if you smoked 15 cigarettes every single day. That's what loneliness does to our physical bodies. All the numbers reflect what God has already said. In the garden, it's not good for man to be alone. And remember, you can be surrounded by people and be lonely, because loneliness and isolation are about how deeply you are known and connected, and that requires you to reveal yourself to other people. Being alone, needing nobody, isn't brave. It's what we do in the West when the hot shame of our vulnerable selves rises too close to the surface and threatens to be seen. That was poetic. Let me give a normal example. The last time that I was with seniors, we do this thing in my class called Appreciations and Concerns, where everyone gets to go around and to give an appreciation or a concern. They can say whatever they want. So I was like, hey, let's do one last Appreciations and Concerns. Impromptu, every one of the seniors said really nice things to me, which I honestly was not expecting. Like, they all said like meaningful things. And I got emotional, and I was like, I'll see you at graduation. End call. Bam. I found myself choking up, and I didn't want to linger. I was afraid to reveal that part of me. I bet you can think of a time in your own life where you quickly changed the subject, right at that place where you could have been deeply known and deeply loved. We fear being seen. Yet when we are seen and loved, just as we are, it is a wholesome balm to the raw and the frenetic hurriedness and distraction of our world. When we wash off the social concealers, when we wipe clean the contouring of the best parts of our personality and reveal the simple, open self that's underneath, we're risking to be seen, which is the great and courageous task of being a free human. And what we need to find, and what we find there is what Mr. Rogers says. And Mr. Rogers is really just echoing Miss T here. You don't ever have to do anything sensational for people to love you. So here are the steps to success. 1, meet yourself often with all the joy and the grief that honesty always brings. 2, refuse to let the hot shame of your most honest self cloister you into a garden of distractions and pleasant acquaintances. And 3, muster the courage to be seen and loved, and therefore free. So, go ahead and grab your horse and let the sun set on your childhood. Let it rise on a new morning. Let us celebrate the new day and mourn what is passing also, and find ourselves living the way of Jesus, the second Adam, who naked and bare revealed to us the fullness of free human living by hanging on a cross and calling out that he was thirsty, by kneeling in a garden and crying, by looking deep into the eyes of the disciples that he was over with a pleading anguish and asking for help, saying, "Pray with me, my soul is exceeding sorrowful, even unto death." The second Adam was the first free human, embodying the courage to be loved. So let's walk into this life with one another. You can bring your horse too. Arms linked together with our faces unveiled. Let us risk the full and greatest commandment. May you and I have the courage to love. Thank you.